Yes, I can hear you fine, Larry.
All right, buddy. Now I hear you perfect. That was all. See, you did good coming on all by yourself. I knew you could do it.
No, I needed my wife.
The truth comes out. There it is.
Oh, boy.
Hey, Ed, let me ask you something, which was, something that always amazed me about you. And, I watched you growing up. I wasn't born to 66. So I got, when I started seeing you, it was early 70s, maybe when I got into baseball and all that. But the one thing that always surprised me is that you were a left-handed hitter, but you threw righty. How did that all come about?
It was one of those things. I was like Roger Maris, my idol. He threw right-handed and batted left-handed. And it was one of those things where my father batted cross-handed and the rest of my brothers all batted left-handed. So I thought, well, I'll just jump on that side of the plate and make it
easy. Well, yeah. Now, let me ask you this. This was also interesting. I find a lot of interest in things, and I knew you well growing up as a player, of course. And you were a star third baseman, I believe, in high school. And when you finally got drafted, you switched over to outfield because they switched you over to that. And then there was a time, I believe, as your career was beginning at the major league level, they had asked you to go back down to become a catcher. Why don't you tell us about the transition to catcher? And were you up for it, or was it something you didn't want to do?
Well, it was one of those things where I was drafted out of high school and I was a third baseman. Well, the first day I got in camp in Bradenton, Florida, they told me I was an outfielder. I said, I never played the outfield a day in my life. And they said, you do now. So I spent 3 years in A-ball playing the outfield. Then I went from A-ball to AAA. I skipped over AA and I played 2 years at AAA. And then after the second year of AAA, plus coming to the major leagues during the course of the season as an outfielder, Harding Peterson, the minor league director or the major league GM, came to me and said, Ed, we'd like you to try catching. And I said, catching? I said, I never had the catching gear on a day in my life. And he said, well, we would like you to try catching instead of being an outfield. So I came home. And I was married to my first wife at the time, and I was sitting there watching a football game, and I looked at my wife and I said, I think I just found out 3 reasons why I should switch to catching. And she goes, what's that? I said, Al Oliver, Dave Parker, and Richie Zisk. So I made the transition. I came to spring training the following year as a catcher. It took me about 2 weeks to figure out that I was supposed to keep my eyes open when the hitters swung. So, towards the end of spring training, Harding Peterson brought me into the front office and said, Ed, we're going to send you to AA to learn how to catch. And I said, Pete, let me put it to you this way. I said, I'm either going to AAA or I'm going home to learn how to catch. And he said, well, what's the reasoning behind that? And I said, well, number one, I said, in A-ball, you're not a catcher, you're a goalie. Because these pitchers have no idea where they're throwing the ball. And you're blocking the ball and jumping all over trying to catch it. And then I said, at AA, at least you're a part-time goalie and part-time catcher. But I said, at AAA, I said, you have major league pitchers that are being sent down and pitchers that are supposed to be sent up to the major leagues. So wouldn't it make it easier for me to learn how to catch at the AAA level than it would be at the AA level? And he said, well, let me think about it for a couple of days. And a couple of days went by. He called me back in his office. And he said, okay, we decided that we're going to send you to AAA, but if you can't handle it, we're going to send you back to AA. And I said, Pete, that's all I asked. So it was one of those things where we ended up the whole year at AAA. And Gary Carter and I ended up being the all-star catchers that year. And the following year, I came to the big leagues as a catcher.
Now, Ed, let's talk about that 1979 season because it was amazing. And the one thing that really, you had an unbelievable, I think your best season as a catcher that year, batted 273, 7 homers, 51 RBIs, and I think you were second in Gene Tennis in fielding percentage. So a great year by you. But the amazing thing about the Pirates that you really don't see today. They had a few guys that can hit the long ball. Let's not, they had Stargell, they had Parker, they had Milner. You had guys, but this team can flat out hit. It does not just home runs, but they had Madlock, they had Stargell, they had Stennett. I mean, everybody on that team could hit.
Well, it was amazing because most of us had our best years that year. Tim Foley had one of his best years. Steve Nicosia and I as catchers had our best years. Phil Garner had a great year. Of course, Stargell, Parker, they had their years. And then you had Bill Robinson, Omar Marino stole 70-some bases that year.
Yep.
It was just one of those things that we were called the family, and that's exactly what we were. We were probably the closest knit 25 members of a ball club that you'd ever want to see in the history of baseball.
Yeah, and you mentioned Omar with the 70 stolen bases. Then you had two other guys on the team with 20 stolen bases. Then you had even Bill Robinson, I think, had 16 to 20 stolen bases. I mean, the game was a completely different game than we see today. I mean, you're talking right there over 120 steals between, more than that even, between those four guys.
Well, it was amazing because that's basically the way the game was taught to be played back then. It was get on, try to steal second. If you didn't steal second, the next guy gets a base hit, and you go from first to third. Nowadays, it's not so much. There's not so much emphasis put on driving in runs and getting doing what's best for the ball club. Nowadays, it's everybody wants to hit the home run, and it's one of those things where it's kind of an ugly game now. But back then we played the game the way the game was meant to be played.
And talk about your World Series experience. I mean, you had never been in the World Series before. You get to the World Series, you had a terrific World Series, had a 333. I think you had like 3 RBIs. And of course, most importantly, you guys ended up winning the World Series. Talk about your experience and what it was like for you to play on that big stage.
It was just one of those things where we got to the World Series. We swept Cincinnati in Cincinnati, and that was something that hasn't been done for years with Pittsburgh and Cincinnati. We went into the World Series with the idea that we were just going to play our game, and we started the first game, and Bruce Geeson gives up a home run in the first inning, and they end up, I guess, scoring 4 runs in the first inning. And it was one of those things where I think we lost the game 4-3. And then we came back the second game, and then I led off the 8th or 9th inning with a single and ended up scoring the winning run on Manny Sanguillen's pinch hit base hit to right field. Then we were tied 1-1. We went back to Pittsburgh, and we ended up losing game 3, losing game 4, and then we were down 3-1. And it was just one of those things where we all looked at each other and said, well, we have nothing to lose. Let's go out there and just play the game that we can play. So we ended up winning game 5, then game 6. And when we won game 6, it was all over. The World Series was ours to have.
What was it like in the city of Pittsburgh, and how did they embrace the Pirates?
Oh, it was fantastic because that's the way we played. We played like we were Hard Knock Baseball ball club. And Pittsburgh loves that. Between the Steelers and us, it's one of those. It's an iron city. It's a hard-nosed city. It's a worker city. And we went out and played the way that they love to see players play the game, the way the Steelers do.
Now, Ed, I know it comes up a lot in conversation when people are interviewing you and stuff, but I got to tell you, for the first 13 years of my life, I lived in New York. Okay? I lived on Long Island. I was a big Mets fan growing up. Now, I don't need to tell you that my favorite player happened to be at that time Felix Millan, okay? And I see a sticker in there. So you can imagine my feelings after that August 12th day as a little kid. But, I know it gets brought up a lot, and it's an unfortunate situation. I mean, you never go to play a game thinking of a brawl and hurting somebody. It's never intentional. But, my question to you about that whole deal isn't what happened. You can see what happened. But my question was, and it might sound weird, but have you ever talked to Felix after that day?
No, I never have, but a lot of people don't understand exactly what took place during there. It was a ground ball that I slid into second base, and I just barely caught his foot enough so he could not continue with the double play. And as I get up, when I slide, I always brush my legs off. When I brushed my legs off, I saw something out of the corner of my eye, and he had the baseball in his hand, and he hit me in the mouth with the baseball. And I was a wrestler my whole life since I was knee-high in grass. So what took place next, within the next second, was a reaction of what I was grown up to be, and that was a wrestler. And then I happened to pick him up and slam him to the ground. Unfortunately, he ended up breaking his collarbone, and he was unconscious for a while. But what a lot of people don't understand is that I also broke my collarbone during that period of time. But the problem is 5 days later, I was playing again with a broken collarbone. So it's one of those things. It's not the happiest thing that I was ever glad doing. It was unfortunate for both of us. And it was one of those things that I just have to live with. And I get probably about one or two questions about that per week on the internet. It's just one of those things. I'm not proud of what took place. I'm sure that Felix feels sorry for what he did. And I know darn well that I actually feel sorry for what ended up happening to be the consequences to him.
Sure. Completely understand that. Now, I want to talk about your transition to coaching. After you hurt your collarbone, I know you tried to come back with the Angels. Things didn't work out. You retired from baseball as a player. Now, was coaching something you thought about while you were playing, or was it something where your buddy Art Howe came to you after your career and said, listen, I have a position, would you like to do it?
Well, actually, after I got with the California Angels and signed a free agent contract, I had back-to-back rotator cuff surgery, and that's when I retired. And then my third year of the contract, California asked me if I would go up to their AAA ball club, which was Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, and help coach the young kids because they heard that I worked so well with the young players. And I said, absolutely, I owe you something after 2 years of not being able to play and getting paid for it. So I went into coaching there with the option the following year. Pittsburgh asked me to become a manager in the minor league system, in which I jumped at. It was one of those where I just went through a divorce, and I had a meeting with Harding Peterson in Pittsburgh. And down there, he was there, and he asked me, he says, would you consider coming back as a player, as being the 25th player on our roster? Because I was a left-hand hitter. I played the outfield, I played the infield. I couldn't catch no more because I couldn't make that snap throw. So I told him, I said, well, Pete, I said, how much are you going to pay me? He says, we'll pay you about $250,000 a year and sign a 2-year contract. And I looked at Branch Rickey, which was minor league director, and I looked at Branch and said, Branch, how much does a minor league manager's job pay? He goes, $16,000. And I looked at both of them, and I looked at Branch, and I said, Branch, I'll take the managing job. And the reason I did that, did I need the money? Absolutely, 100%. But there was an incident earlier in my career where one of the players was a veteran on the ball club, being a left-hand hitter, and he was always used by Danny Murtaugh as a left-hand bench hitter. And I said to myself, I will never put myself in that position to take a young player's job. And that's why I devoted myself to go into the coaching and managing. And then when Art Howe got the job down in Houston, Phil Garner called me and said, Ed, why don't you give Art a call? He said, your name's being shuffled around down here as being a catching instructor. And I said, sure. So I called Art, and I went down to Houston and met with him and Bill Woods, the general manager. And Art, the first thing that he said to Bill Woods, he says, Bill, he said, if you don't want to hear Ed's answer, don't ask him the question. It might not be the answer you want to hear, but he's going to tell you the answer the way he feels. And at that time, they both decided to give me a coaching job with the Houston Astros. And I enjoyed that for quite a few years, but it was one of those things, it was just time to move on.
And I got a question for you that, it might not take a little thinking, and it might, but let's say you were coaching today and a player, young player, 20, 21 years old, comes up to you and says, Coach, I was curious if you could answer a question for me. How would you explain the game of baseball when you played it compared to what I am seeing today?
Well, I think the first thing I would say, as I said, the worst thing that ever happened to the game of baseball is the radar gun. Because there's so many kids out there that throw 87, 88 miles an hour with control. And I says the problem nowadays is that all they want to see is 95, 96 miles an hour, and they don't care where it goes. Matter of fact, my first year of managing with the Pittsburgh Pirates, we were in spring training, all the coaching staff and minor league managers, and they were talking about an individual, a player, and the one coach stood up and said, well, this kid can throw a ball through a brick wall. And I just sat there for a second. I said, can I ask a question? And they said, well, yeah. And I said, how many times does he hit the wall? It's not how hard you throw. It's whether you can throw strikes with the accuracy that you're supposed to have at the major league level. And that, I think, is probably the part of the game that's really went wrong, is now all of a sudden everybody wants to throw 96, 97 miles an hour, and they have no idea where the ball's gone. The second one is...
And I was just going to ask you that, Ed. I was just going to say that to you. You've been a catcher, and I was always taught, and I'm not saying this because you're on the show and you are a catcher, but I was always told the catcher is the smartest guy on the field. He can see everything in front of him, what's going on, call, defensive shifts, everything. But my question to you is, the game of baseball, everybody in the major leagues has the ability to hit a fastball. Why do they concentrate so much on speed when they should be concentrating on location?
That's a good question. I wish I knew that. If I did, I'd be the smartest guy in the world. But remember, catchers were always told that it was the tools of ignorance. It wasn't the tools of ignorance. It was the tools of intelligence. Because like you said, you had to run the ball club. And it's one of those things now where I watch games on TV now, and I watch this new era of baseball when they put on the shift. They have three guys to one side of the infield to a left-hand hitter per se, and all of a sudden the catcher's setting up outside. Well, you can drive 18 Mack trucks through the left side of the infield. Why are you pitching the guy away from the shift? You have to pitch into the shift, not away from the shift. And that's why you see guys now bunting and going to left field. To right field as a left-hand hitter, because there's nobody over there to catch the ball. It's a game that's really changed, and I'm not so sure it's changed for the best, but it's one of those things that they're getting paid a lot of money, for doing what they're doing. And it's one of those things where the other thing I can't understand is evidently no player can think for themselves anymore, because every time there's a pitcher change or a hitter change, everybody's got to reach in their back pocket and bring out their card and how they're going to pitch.
Yeah, that's right.
It's, my God, can't they think for themselves anymore? Do they have to rely on a little cheat sheet card? That's like taking a test in high school with a little cheat sheet.
I had both of them were your teammates. I had Bill Madlock, and I also had Mike Eastlaw on my show before. And one of them, I think it was Mike, that said that, in his opinion, the shift would have never worked back then because the hitters were too good and they would know how to go the other way. Where players today, they'll leave the whole side open and they won't adjust like the players would back when you played. Do you agree with that?
Well, back when we played for one run per inning. If you can score 9 runs during the game, you're going to win. Nowadays, everybody plays for the crooked number. They play for 3-4 runs an inning. That's why you see, games go 0-0 into the fourth, and then all of a sudden somebody scores 5, and then somebody scores 5 more to tie it up. But it's just, back then, we played for 1 run every inning, and how'd you do that? You did it by execution. If they were going to put on a shift with us back then, trust me, 80% of us would have went the other way. Stargell and Parker, no. they would have still pulled the ball if they had to. But the rest of us would have went the other way, and we would have put up big numbers back then against this shit.
Yeah. Now, as a catcher, what is your opinion of this rule they're trying to implement? They're studying it in the minor leagues of moving the pitcher's mound back another foot.
They might as well move it back 4 feet. They can't throw strikes now.
Yeah, and like you mentioned earlier, it doesn't matter. The idea of the pitching, like you said, is all about location. So, like you said, if they can't hit it now, they're not going to hit the target, obviously, with a foot back.
No, absolutely not. They're still going to be able to throw, they have to throw strikes with their fastball. And when they do, that's the ones that get hammered.
And I asked a lot of the Pirate players that played back in the 70s this question. I probably know the answer already, but I like to hear it anyway. One of my favorite players growing up was your teammate Dave Parker. Just incredible outfield, incredible hitter, unbelievable arm. Should Dave Parker be in the Hall of Fame?
Absolutely, no doubt about it. He's probably one of the top 3 best players that I've ever played with or against at the major league level. Dave could do it all. He could run, hit, throw. He was basically a 5-tool guy. And Dave and I were both signed the same year in 1970. I was the 23rd round and he was the 21st round. So it was one of those things where we both battled ourselves. We learned how to play the outfield position because the first year that Dave was at the minor league level in 1970, after he got drafted out of high school, they made him wear a helmet in spring training. We were that bad of outfielders. We were terrible. And both of us were fortunate to play with a manager named Tom Sapple in Monroe, North Carolina. Tom Sapple is the one person that we owed our outfield career to because he taught us how to play the outfield. He says, always think one runner ahead. Always think about what you're going to do of a slow ball hit to you, slow ball hit to the right, slow ball hit to the left, hard hit ball hit right at you, hard hit ball to the right and left, who was on base, wherever the best base runners, So, and always back up bases because there was nowhere else to do. If there was a ball hit to left field and I was playing right field, I had to back up second base. If the ball was hit the right field and Dave was like playing left field, he had to back up third base. So it was one of those things that Tom Sapple and Dave Parker and I both owe him all the credit of learning how to play the outfield. But as far as talent-wise, Dave Parker is by far the top 3 that I've ever played with in my life, with or against.
A couple more questions. I'll let you run, Ed. I could have sworn, and correct me if I'm wrong, that one year, I thought it was one time. If it was more, tell me. You actually caught a no-hitter, didn't you?
No, I did not.
Okay, then I was wrong. Okay.
Johnny Dyer caught John Candelari's no-hitter, and that was the only no-hitter while I was at Pittsburgh.
Okay. I couldn't remember. I thought it was you, actually. But my last question to you, who is, out of you catching, not that you ever seen now, but as a catcher, who's the best pitcher that you ever caught?
Oh, no question about it. Bert Blyleven. Bert Blyleven played for us in 1979.
Yeah, that's right.
Best pitcher. I mean, his curveball was ungodly. It was unhittable. I don't care if you're right or left. And I think if you go back to the Cincinnati, when we were playing Cincinnati in the playoffs in 79, Cesar Geronimo was batting a left-hand hitter, and we threw him a 2-2 curveball, and he buckled his knees for strike 3, and that was the end of the game. If a player can buckle a left-hand hitter with a curveball and you're right-handed, that's probably the best curveball in the history of baseball. Bert Blyleven, hands down.
All right, my friend. Well, listen, Ed, I want to first of all thank you for allowing me the pleasure and time to have you as a guest here on Frankly Speaking Sports tonight.
All right, my pleasure, Larry. Thank you very much for having me. Have a good night.
All right, Ed. Stay safe, okay?
Sure will. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. All right, that was former catcher Ed Ott of the Pittsburgh Pirates.